Van Helsing, now that you have learned what you have learned, it would be well for you to return to your own country.
I prefer to remain and protect those whom you would destroy.
You are too late. My blood now flows through her veins. She will live through the centuries to come, as I have lived.
Should you escape us, Dracula, we know how to save Miss Mina's soul, if not her life.
If she dies by day, but I shall see that she dies by night.
And I will have Carfax Abbey torn down stone by stone, excavated a mile around. I will find your earth box and drive that stake through your heart.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan.
And I'm Mike.
So welcome to this special Halloween episode of 15-Minute Film Fanatics, the podcast where Mike and I watch movies separately and talk about them on the show for the first time. Today, in honor of the day, we're going to be doing the original Dracula from 1931, directed by Todd Browning, based on a stage play that was on Broadway in 1927, in which Bela Lugosi famously played the Count. And let's go, Mike. Part one, we always talk about our overall impressions from watching a movie again. What do you got?
This is our third one, and I think what struck me was you could almost do a history of film and film technique only in vampire movies, because I would say they reoccur once every generation, but they reoccur like 5 every generation. And so you get a real sense for how far things have come. So to put it in perspective, we did the original Nosferatu by Murnau, and this is about 10 years later that you get the version of Dracula that we both just watched, which is essentially a contemporary film. There's a couple of bad effects, or forgive me, there's a couple of stage effects that they obviously filmed without figuring out ways to do film effects for them. But in all essences, in the editing, in the camera placement, in its structure, it's just a movie like you'd go watch a movie today. And so to go from the era of silent film to essentially contemporary film within 10 years, I think, shows you the way in which just the soundscape transformed film in general. And I actually noticed that this film has a wonderful soundscape. I found an interesting YouTube video that you can go watch, which is scenes from Dracula with and without the soundscape. I watched the Criterion version, which I think we both watched, which had it, which was wonderful. And the use of film sound in order to heighten emotion it essentially creates this beautiful, rich, emotional backdrop that I think takes some of the corniness out of some of the effects. I will say one thing though, which is that you get true stage performances. No offense to movie actors. Of course, this is a film podcast. We love movie actors, but the people in this movie are not movie actors. No. The performance of Renfield in particular, it's actually chilling.
Bigger,
and it's
make it bigger,
and it's and
give him some more.
And it's much better than you would expect. It's almost too big for the screen, as you said. It's the kind of thing where he's playing for the back of the house, but he's playing for the back of the house 20 feet in front of your house. Camera. In your house. Yeah, that's exactly right. So is it dramatic? Yes, but I would say it's dramatic in a way that appeals to me. And actually, I think that the people who wrote the play upon which this was based really understood their source material in a way that perhaps obviously it's different than the Nosferatu with Klaus Kinski, but that team had something else totally up their sleeve. Murnau had something up their sleeve when Francis Ford Coppola did his version. He had something else up his sleeve. The team that worked on this version of Dracula from 1931, like the famous Dracula, the one like where you get your Muppet count from, they really understood what they were about. And I'll get more into that in part 2. What do you think?
One wonderful podcast. 15 minutes film. It's funny what you said about being stagey, because it's also stagey in terms of like, there's so many scenes where it's like a filmed play. Like, we're now going to sit in this room and give you information about how to kill a vampire. Now we'll go into this room out, or we'll go outside on the patio, and then we'll talk some more about the vampire. Oh, look, there he is. So you could see it staged in that way. You mentioned the soundscape. One thing I loved about watching it again, and I watched it last night, is the lack of music makes all of the scenes creepier. Like when the three brides come out and they're in like the basement of the castle, or whatever you call it, the subterranean part, and they're all walking towards him. It's so much better without quote unquote horror movie music. And the whole film is sustained that way. I thought that was really, really terrific. I love all those weird silences, like when Renfield gets to the crossroads and he has to get into the carriage that Dracula's driving, and there's just like no music, no conversation. He's like, okay, here's my bags. And there's almost all these, we talked about in Nosferatu's, in Herzog's, he's the king of like stilted time. And we talked about the clock. It's like here, like the emotions are all kind of stilted and strange. Like it's strange the way Renfield acts when he goes to Transylvania, but it all really works because it's very, very much stripped down. I also think what you said about the stage version is interesting, because we've both read the novel. And I think that these movies are definitely, and I know this is heresy, whatever, but it's Halloween. They're such improvements on the source material. Like it's amazing. It's amazing what the novel gets right. But I think Dracula as a novel is the kind of thing you read, and then you kind of romanticize the experience of reading it when it's over, because a lot of times going through it, it's like, yeah, this is like it's got an impact on you that's felt after you're done turning those pages.
The best parts of it are the first two chapters,
yes,
which are Jonathan Harker's diary, where he's narrating how tired he is of garlic sausages. And the reason it's so good is because it's building upon this sense of dread. He says, I go from inn to inn to inn, and the closer into the country I get, the more superstitious these peasants get. And they're all crying and praying over me, and I don't understand what's happening. So in that way, it's very much like, if you enjoy Lovecraft or you enjoy Cthulhu, where something is happening behind what's happening, and you have to pick up on it. I think that when you lose the sense of dread, the novel itself dies once Van Helsing tells everybody what the creature is and explains the rules. And because essentially all the tension is released, but you have another 200 pages. I think what the folks who do movies like this get correct is that that tension is released much closer to the final scene. Right. And then the final scene it is much more of a showdown than it ends up being in the novel, which is, again, it's just lacking tension and lacking structure. But Dracula has an emotional structure because it's not about fear of the thing itself. It's about the dread of the fear of the thing itself, or the emotion of feeling like it's creeping up on you.
And let's talk also about how great Bela Lugosi is. He's again, often parodied because he laid all the groundwork, but his terrific, talk about the 1,000-yard stare, and just all his hypnosis scenes, I think, are terrific. I mean, he really.
They said that women fainted, that church attendance was up. So, that's the best review you could possibly get. Welcome back. So, of course, in part 2, we talk about our favorite scenes or key scenes. Dan, why don't you get us started?
So my key scene is going to remind us of a movie that we both like, that we did a couple of seasons ago. My scene is when Harker is looking at Mina's throat and says, how long have you had these marks? And she kind of covers it up and tries to put it away. For whatever reason, what struck me watching the movie this time was how much it reminded me of, not Nosferatu, but The Man with the Golden Arm. So you gotta stay with me for a second on this, right? Yeah. It's like, we're used to reading about Dracula as a plague or as quote unquote the other or a parasite, but all over this movie, it struck me as like the people that have to deal with Dracula and Dracula himself, they all speak as if they're addicts, right? Like the way Mina lies about herself. His power is at night. She becomes a thing with like no will of her own. Like Dracula controls what she's going to say. Like when she's in the window and she's going, yes, I will. It's like he's like the personification of this terrible addiction, and Renfield is like almost like overdosed on it, right? Like he's like a junkie when he's in the asylum. and he's screaming at the bars and like, let me out and things. He's all in. He's all in. Mina tries to hide her addiction and say, no, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. And, like, I think it's funny because Van Helsing says the strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him. And that strikes me as like the language of justification. Like every addict says, well, I can quit whenever I want. And, I don't really believe in the power of this thing. And I'm not going to like draw too fine a point on it, but it just struck me as interesting that like Mina's covering up for Dracula. It's part of the spell. He's hypnotized her. But certainly, the way that like he says, I've commingled my blood with hers or her blood with mine, is that like once, that's like the whole thing with vampires, right? Once you let them in, once you acknowledge them, then you can't get them out, right? Once the vampire bites you on the neck, you can't unbite it. And it strikes me as like it's a very interesting way to think about the nature of addiction.
Well, I had an interesting thought that kind of turned into, again, what I want to keep a loose framework that occurred to me in my moment, which is the showdown between Dracula and Van Helsing, which is that Dracula says, I think it would be best if you return to your own country. And so he reminds Van Helsing that he's not from Britain either.
Right.
And so I think, the original Dracula, the source material that we said that this is a much better adaptation of, is very much about Europe.
Right.
And I think that actually in turning this into the play, which got made into the movie, that was very much at the forefront of the mind. Britain is not exactly the New World, but it's the furthest west you can get without coming to the New World, right? And there's that weird scene of Dracula walking in the streets like Dracula has stumbled onto the opening scene of My Fair Lady.
Totally, with his top hat. Totally, yeah.
Laugh at your button, I'll say. And he kills her, which he kills Eliza Doolittle.
Right.
But that scene, right? Or Dracula goes to the opera and the lady's looking with the little little flashlight. But where does he live? He still lives in Carfax Abbey, and so there's if you study like Anglo-Saxon literature, the beauty of Anglo-Saxon literature is that everybody in Anglo-Saxon Britain knew that there was an old England built by Rome, and then essentially there was an apocalypse, like the world ended, and they built a new civilization on top of that. And so what Dracula is like an invasion of the old world into the world of flashlights and opera and pretty boxes and fireplaces and sanatoriums where they talk that kind of thing out of you.
Right.
But Van Helsing is also European. And so the interesting thing is, if you let the old world in, are you going back to the Dark Ages, which is Dracula, or have you convinced yourself that you're enlightened now?
Yeah.
And so Dracula is almost an anti-enlightenment piece for exactly, I think, the same way that you were talking about. What they said is that the power of Dracula is that no one's going to believe in him, and so that this seems to say disbelieve at your own risk, because you can quote unquote kick the Europeans out, but you can't kick the dark influences out, right? You can get rid of superstition, but you can't get rid of evil.
Yes.
And
right. And you think you can get rid of superstition. Like, it's easy to laugh at the gypsies. Like, the gypsies in every Dracula movie are there to be scorned at. But of course, we'll laugh at Walpurgis Night and stuff like that. But of course, one thing we know from the story is that the gypsies are
100% correct.
Correct, right? They're 100% right. So every quote unquote enlightened, as you said, enlightened European looks at the gypsies. But of course, as we said in the new Nosferatu film, they have that big red book. Like, they have the instruction manual. They know how this goes. And it's funny what you said. You disbelieve at your own peril, because I think that the movie, now we're getting into it, the movie dramatizes what Samuel Johnson said about ghosts. Do you know what Samuel Johnson said about ghosts?
Remind me.
He said about the Cock Lane ghost, was a famous thing. He said, it's amazing that thousands of years have gone by and haven't done anything to change how we think about ghosts. He said, all argument is against them, but all belief is for them. And so we're very rational to dismiss ghosts and laugh at the gypsies, but there's something about them that hits us in the very pit of our stomachs.
And what is it like? It's like something we know, but we can't prove. It's like, I know that you don't reflect in a mirror, but as soon as I turn the mirror up to your face, it smashes for whatever reason. Right. So I know that it's true, but I don't know that it's true. And I think that it's very interesting. you could imagine an adaptation of Dracula, and there are many adaptations of Dracula where Dr. Von Helsing belongs in whatever country he's in. It's not, for example, in the Klaus Kinski version by Werner Herzog, it's obvious that he's not from there, but he's as German as everybody else, right? But despite the name. So maybe his ancestors immigrated however long ago. In Dracula's version, Dracula recognizes him as a homeboy and says, you don't belong here and I don't belong here, but you don't belong here more than I don't belong here because they at least like me. I have influence here. You get out. And so that it's interesting that's the showdown is for the showdown is for the soul of the new century, fought over by two old Europeans.
And that's what's so great, because one of the things I loved about, well, let's save it for the ending. I'll see you in part 3. So welcome back. We're going to continue now with part 3, where we talk about the ending and keeping going with this idea about Von Helsing and Dracula. I love the fact that in this film, those two are set up as great, like hero and villains. It's like a Western almost. It's like a showdown for this land and who's going to get it. And they're so worthy of each other, right? Like even the way they look, like Dracula's great. Like this is definitely the 007 Dracula. Like he's definitely like, I'm very sexy and none of your women are safe around me. And Von Helsing, of course, has like the thickest glasses you can imagine to show intelligence, and science. And that's who he is. And even his German accent, I think, is supposed to kind of give him that air of that's why he's Professor Van Helsing. It never calls him professor, right? He knows everything, but the knowledge he has is not the kind of thing you would expect to learn, at your community college.
Well, it's interesting that he goes for the wolfsbane first.
Right.
And then almost as though he's convinced himself, he goes for the cross second, because you'll remember that the peasants go for the cross first. They put the cross on Renfield first, and say, if you wear this, it'll protect you. And so Von Helsing he's got to be re-Europeanized because he's been in London too long.
Yeah.
He does what any scientist does. He goes for some kind of herb first.
It's trying to understand cure. Absolutely.
Trying to understand what kind of strange properties it has. And then he remembers what his grandma told him or her grandma told her, which is you just use the cross, which that is the most effective thing. Well,
that's what's great. The wolfsbane is, of course, science. Well, this is the scientific way to get rid of. Of course, everyone knows that there's got to be some kind of property in this, the same way that, scientists discovered that aloe will help you if you have a sunburn.
Right. Although, of course, the technical cure is like, I don't know, keep her away from him, like close it. Maybe we should think about closing that window. What do you think?
And then, of course, the great thing is at the end, I love at the end how we could talk about the very end now. He's so matter of fact when he says, please go get me a large stone I could use to drive the stake through his heart. He's like, he talks about having to put the stake through their hearts the way I talk about having to go to the supermarket. Like, let me know if we need any bananas or give me a large rock.
The best part is if you and I went to go kill a vampire tonight, of course, that would be the thing that would confound us, right? We sneak in and we get in and you're like, you got the stick, right? It's like, what are you going to, you didn't bring a hammer?
You didn't bring a mallet?
Like, man. Right. Hammer. What do we have? Do we have a rock? Look around. Right. That would be the scariest part.
Right. Just like in real life, if you ever don't have a hammer, you try to use something like the back of and you end up,
soup can.
Yeah, and then you end up breaking it and it makes a mess. But he's now let's talk about the ending, of course, is that he kills Dracula, he kills the brides. Mina is set free. She goes up the steps with Harker, and they say to Von Helsing, "Are you coming?" And he says, "No, not yet." They just leave him there. Now, what did you make of that? Did you make anything of it?
He's so if it's a battle between it's a battle between him and Dracula to see if Jonathan and Mina can get married in peace. Like, how are you gonna negotiate this new century? And of course they were only like 30 years into the new century, so and it wasn't going well, obviously, because Dracula's written pre-World War I, right? And then and this is a romanticization of pre-World War I of fin de siècle. So he doesn't belong up there is actually the point. That's where he and Dracula both belong in the basement of history, but you can't have one or the other. They both come as a set package, right? And so if you embrace superstition, there's a dark side of it, right? They keep saying to they keep telling Dr. Van Helsing that he's the one that's upsetting Mina, and he keeps saying, I'm not the one that's upsetting Mina, I'm just trying to tell you how it is, right? And so there's many things that are relegated to the idea of superstition, one of them being monsters and ghosts, the other being religion, the others being certain human truths that we know to be true but you can't see under a microscope. And unfortunately, you either take the light with the dark, or you pretend that they don't exist. And so I took it as the blissful young couple, once they've gotten out of that danger, they're about to forget that it all exists until the next time. And that's why Dr. Van Helsing doesn't walk out with them hand in hand.
Yeah, I assumed that he was down there to finish his scientific experiments and to do some kind of post-mortem or some kind of autopsy on the vampire.
I think I think in the novel, again, this is the source material, he's supposed to decapitate them.
Yes.
And so that what I took that to be is, I need you're young and strong, I need you to help me with the stakes, but the real gross part, why don't you go upstairs?
I need some alone time. Why don't you guys go up the stairs? I don't want to be the third wheel. I don't want to be the third wheel in your marriage or in the new century. But the reason we keep watching these movies is because that third wheel won't go away. That's why vampires are such great for our movies, right?
It's again, there's a sense of dread which your intellect tells you does not exist, but your intuition tells you there's something beyond the intellect that you need to protect yourself. And if you pretend like, the only way that it can get you is if you pretend that it's not happening.
As Hemingway says in The Sun Also Rises, it's very easy to be hard-boiled in the daytime, but at night it's another thing. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We hope you enjoyed our conversation about Dracula. You could follow us on Twitter at 15MINFilm. You can follow us on Letterboxd and see what we're watching and let us know what to watch next. Have a great Halloween, everybody. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next time.